The moment Troy Peterson called my quality standards outdated paranoia, I knew I was watching a man about to kill people with a spreadsheet. I'm Gordon Hayes, 56 years old, and I've been keeping medical devices safe for 22 years. Troy had been COO for exactly 8 months and thought he understood manufacturing better than someone who'd spent 2 decades making sure ventilators actually work when people need them to breathe. I was sitting in that glass conference room at Atlas Medical Technologies, watching Troy wave around his laptop like it contained the secrets of the universe. "We need to embrace offshore manufacturing solutions," he kept saying. "Gordon's approach is stuck in the past. We can cut production costs by 60% and still maintain quality standards." The guy had an MBA from Wharton and 0 experience in medical device manufacturing. He thought quality control was something you could download from a consultant's PowerPoint. What Troy didn't understand was that I wasn't just some inspector you could replace with cheaper labor overseas. I held FDA certification. I designed the quality protocols that protected our $45 million in annual revenue and kept our ventilators from killing patients. Every device that left our facility had my signature on it, and that signature meant something to the 15,000 people breathing through our equipment right now. My Army background shaped everything about how I approached quality control. 6 years patching up soldiers in field hospitals taught me that when equipment fails, people die. It's not theoretical. It's not a statistic in a quarterly report. It's someone's father who doesn't come home because his ventilator had a defective valve that some cost-cutting executive decided was acceptable risk. The writing had been on the wall for weeks. First, they moved my office from the production floor to a corner cubicle near accounting. Rebecca Martinez from legal kept shooting me worried glances during meetings like she could see the train wreck coming but couldn't stop it. Dave Morrison, my lead quality engineer, started documenting everything without being asked. Smart guy, knew which way the wind was blowing. Then Troy started scheduling efficiency reviews without inviting me. I'd catch glimpses of presentations about legacy quality paradigms and streamlined compliance processes. Corporate speak for fire the old guy and hire someone cheaper. I'd been through enough restructuring to recognize the pattern. When management stops including you in decisions about your own department, you're already dead. You just don't know when the funeral is. The day it happened, Troy called it an all-hands strategic planning session. 22 people crammed into the main conference room, and Troy standing there with his presentation like he was about to save the company. Carl Richardson, our founder, sat at the head of the table looking like a man who'd already made peace with whatever was coming. Gary Sullivan, the CEO, kept checking his phone like he had somewhere more important to be. "We're revolutionizing our manufacturing approach," Troy announced, clicking to his first slide. "Partnering with premier offshore facilities that will reduce our production costs by 60% while maintaining our commitment to quality." I almost laughed. Maintaining quality by moving production to factories I'd never inspected, with workers I'd never trained, using processes I'd never verified. That was like maintaining flight safety by letting passengers fly the plane. The room went quiet. Nicole Thompson from HR was taking notes like her life depended on it. Howard Palmer, our CFO, nodded along with the enthusiasm of a man watching his profit margins explode. Floyd Anderson from procurement looked confused. He knew enough about manufacturing to smell trouble. "Gordon," Troy said, turning to me with that practiced smile, "your position will be transitioning to our offshore partners. They'll be handling all quality operations moving forward." The silence stretched. Dave was staring at his hands. Rebecca had gone pale. Everyone else was suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups. 22 years of combined experience in that room, and nobody had the spine to point out the obvious problem. I didn't react. 6 years in Army field hospitals teaches you not to flinch when someone's about to make a fatal mistake. "And my FDA certification?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Troy waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. "They have their own certified professionals, very cutting edge, internationally recognized." That's when I knew he had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. My FDA certification wasn't transferable. It was tied to me personally, verified through background checks that took 18 months, connected to quality protocols I'd built from the ground up over 2 decades. You can't just hand that off to some overseas contractor and hope it works. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my quality control badge. It wasn't like the plastic cards everyone else carried. This one was federal grade, laminated with FDA seals, connected to manufacturing systems throughout the facility. It had taken me 8 months to get after joining the company, and it represented oversight of production lines most people in the room didn't even know existed. I placed it on the table with a soft click. "You'll need this," I said. Troy laughed. Actually, laughed. "That's just for building access, right? The offshore team will get their own credentials." I looked at him for a long moment, then around the table. People were starting to shift uncomfortably. Rebecca opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then thought better of it. "In the Army, we had a saying, never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." "Sure," I said. "They'll figure it out." The meeting ended with handshakes and promises about smooth transitions. Troy was already talking about celebrating the cost savings, probably planning some executive retreat to pat himself on the back. Carl Richardson looked like he wanted to say something but didn't have the backbone. Gary Sullivan was already mentally spending the money they thought they'd save. I gathered my things and walked out, leaving the badge on the table like a live grenade. Dave caught up with me in the hallway, his face tight with worry. "Gordon, what the hell just happened in there?" he asked, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "They outsourced quality control to the lowest bidder," I said. "What happens next isn't really my problem anymore." Dave ran his hands through his hair. "But the FDA requirements, the certification protocols..." "Exactly." I stopped walking and looked at him. "Dave, you're a good engineer. Start documenting everything you know about our manufacturing processes. In 48 hours, you're going to be the only person left who understands any of it." His face went white. "They can't just lock us out of our own systems, can they?" "They're not locking us out, I'm removing my access. There's a difference." What Troy and the executive team didn't understand was that my certification wasn't just about paperwork and inspections. I maintained direct oversight channels with the FDA. I held authorization keys for production databases that updated every 24 hours. Every manufacturing line we used to produce medical devices required my personal verification, not my job title, not my department, not some generic quality manager. Me. Back in the Army, field hospitals taught me that critical systems need critical people. You can't just swap out the trauma surgeon with a nurse and expect the same results. You follow protocols, you get proper authorization, you maintain safety standards. But corporate America thinks expertise is interchangeable, like they're trading baseball cards. That afternoon, I made my first call. Michelle Roberts at the FDA, someone I'd worked with for 12 years, across 5 different compliance audits. "Military folks understand the importance of proper protocols." "Michelle," I said, "I'm no longer employed by Atlas Medical Technologies. My quality certification needs to be updated immediately." There was a pause. Michelle knew me well enough to catch the implications. "Gordon, are you sure about this?" "That's going to trigger automatic reviews of all your company's production authorizations." "I'm sure." They terminated my position and handed quality oversight to an offshore contractor. Michelle whistled low. "Who approved that transition?" "Nobody who understands what they approved." "Jesus, Gordon, you know this is going to cascade, right? Every production line, every device certification, every FDA approval tied to your oversight." "I know." The second call was to my lawyer, Jim Parker. Nothing dramatic, just notification that I was no longer authorized to represent Atlas Medical in any quality capacity. Jim had handled medical device cases before and knew the drill. "Standard disassociation paperwork?" he asked. "By the book." "Time sensitive. They gave me until 5 p.m. to clean out my desk." Jim laughed, but it wasn't funny. "They fired their quality director without a transition plan. That's either brave or stupid. I'm voting for stupid." The third call was to Rebecca Martinez. As head of legal, she'd been in enough FDA audits to understand what was coming. "Rebecca, it's Gordon. I know you can't talk freely, but you should know I'm filing my disassociation papers this afternoon. My FDA certification will be updated to reflect my employment termination." Silence. Then very quietly, "Gordon, please tell me there's some kind of backup plan I don't know about." "There isn't." Troy thought my job was checking boxes and filing reports. "Oh God." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "The device certifications, the manufacturing approvals, they all require your personal authorization." I tried to explain that in every compliance review for the past 3 years, nobody wanted to listen to outdated paranoia. "How long do we have?" "My authorization expires at midnight tonight. After that, the production lines default to shutdown mode." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Is there anything? Anything at all we can do?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. These people had just thrown away 22 years of my work like it was expired medicine. They'd insulted my expertise, questioned my relevance, and handed my life's work to some offshore company that probably thought quality control was about checking shipping manifests. Troy made his choice, I said. Now he gets to live with the consequences. That evening, I went home and systematically revoked my access to everything. It took 4 hours to go through all the systems: production authorization servers, FDA compliance databases, manufacturing oversight channels, device certification locks, quality audit trails. All of it tied to my personal credentials, all of it going dark at midnight. The beautiful thing about proper quality control is that it's designed to fail safely. When my authorization stopped working, the systems would default to shutdown mode, production lines would halt, FDA-regulated databases would become inaccessible, device certifications that required my personal verification would simply expire. I wasn't sabotaging anything. This was exactly how the systems were supposed to work when authorized personnel were no longer authorized. The fact that Troy had never bothered to understand this wasn't my fault. Around 11 p.m., my phone started ringing. First Dave, probably watching error messages cascade across his quality monitoring screens. Then Howard Palmer, the CFO, his voice tight with panic. "Gordon, there's some kind of system error. We're getting locked out of the production authorization portal." "That's not an error," I said calmly. "That's the system working as designed, but we need access for the morning production run. Howard, call your offshore partners." I hung up and turned off my phone. By morning, Troy Peterson would discover what I'd been trying to tell them for months. You can't just buy quality control from a catalog. You can't download FDA certification from the internet, and you definitely can't replace 22 years of regulatory knowledge with a PowerPoint slide about cost optimization. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Troy was about to get a master class in medical device manufacturing taught by the Food and Drug Administration. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire career protecting people from exactly this kind of corporate stupidity. Now I was going to let Troy experience firsthand what happens when you remove safety protocols from life support equipment manufacturing. My son Michael was a combat medic in Afghanistan. He'd called me just last week telling me about a fellow soldier whose life was saved by a ventilator during a dust storm evacuation. "Dad," he'd said, "I never really understood what you did for work until I saw that machine keep someone breathing when everything else failed." Now Troy wanted to hand that responsibility to some factory overseas that had never seen combat, never watched someone die because equipment failed, never understood that quality control isn't about profit margins. It's about the difference between coming home alive and coming home in a box. Troy was about to learn that lesson the expensive way. Monday morning hit Atlas Medical like a freight train through a china shop. Carl Richardson was in the office by 6:30 a.m., 2 hours earlier than usual, carrying his briefcase like it contained evidence of war crimes. His usual routine involved slow coffee and checking emails. Today, he marched straight to Gary Sullivan's office and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I heard about this later from Dave, who was already at his desk trying to make sense of the error messages flooding his monitoring systems. Every screen in the quality control center was flashing red. Production lines, authorization denied. FDA database, access terminated. Device certifications, expired pending review. By 7 a.m., Troy was stalking through the office like a man whose house was burning down. He'd clearly been up all night, probably on the phone with offshore contractors demanding answers they couldn't give. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and he had that wild look people get when reality starts deviating from their PowerPoint presentations. "Where's Gordon?" he barked at Nicole from HR. "He's no longer employed here," she said carefully. "As of yesterday. I need his phone number. Now." Nicole glanced around nervously. "I'm not sure I can provide personal information about former employees without... Give me the damn number." That's when Rebecca Martinez emerged from the legal department carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver very bad news. "Troy," she said, "we need to talk. Privately." The emergency meeting lasted 15 minutes. When they came out, Troy looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Rebecca had apparently explained what I tried to tell them for years. My FDA certification wasn't just a job perk. It was the legal foundation for every medical device they manufactured. By 8 a.m., the first official notice arrived. an automated email from the FDA with the subject line, Manufacturing Authorization Update, Immediate Attention Required. The message was bureaucratic but clear. Gordon Hayes, designated Quality Director for Atlas Medical Technologies, had filed official termination papers. All device certifications and manufacturing authorizations tied to his oversight were now under mandatory review. Until a replacement was properly vetted and certified, all production activities were suspended. Troy tried calling me. My phone went straight to voicemail. He tried my home number. Same result. Finally, he sent Dave to my house like some kind of messenger boy. "Gordon," Dave said, standing on my front porch looking miserable. "They're freaking out. Troy wants to know if there's any way to, undo this." I poured myself another cup of coffee and considered the question. "Dave, do you remember what I told you about Army field hospitals? Something about critical systems needing critical people? When someone with trauma surgery clearance leaves the unit, you don't just hand their job to a supply clerk and hope for the best. You follow protocols. You get proper authorization. You maintain safety standards." Dave nodded slowly. "And they didn't follow protocols. They didn't even know what the protocols were." By 9 a.m., the second notice arrived. This one was from the Department of Health informing Atlas that their manufacturing license was under review due to irregular quality personnel changes. Translation: they were one step away from being shut down entirely. Howard Palmer called an emergency meeting. The conference room looked like a war zone. Empty coffee cups, scattered papers, and executives with the hollow-eyed look of people watching their quarterly projections evaporate in real time. "Okay," Howard said, trying to project calm authority. "What exactly do we need to get back online?" Rebecca consulted her notes. "Gordon's replacement needs FDA certification, specific training in medical device protocols, and personal authorization from 3 different agencies. The fastest possible timeline is 8 months, assuming the candidate already has preliminary clearance." 8 months? Troy's voice cracked. "We can't wait 8 months. Then we need Gordon back," Rebecca said simply. That's when Troy made his second catastrophic mistake. Instead of swallowing his pride and asking for help, he decided to double down on stupid. "Can't we just keep using his credentials for a few weeks until the transition is complete?" The room went dead silent. Rebecca stared at him like he'd just suggested murdering patients to improve their mortality statistics. "Troy," she said very slowly, "that would be federal fraud. As in felony charges, prison time, and the kind of legal problems that make bankruptcy look like a parking ticket. But he worked here. We paid him. Those credentials should transfer with the job." Gary Sullivan, who'd been quiet through most of this, finally spoke up. "Troy, I think you need to understand something. We didn't just fire an employee. We fired the legal foundation of our entire medical device business. By noon, the offshore manufacturing company had officially admitted they couldn't meet Atlas's FDA requirements. Their internationally recognized quality professionals turned out to have commercial certifications, not the medical device authorization required for life support equipment. Troy had hired them based on their cost projections without checking whether they were actually qualified for the job. The first production halt came at 1 p.m. of $4.2 million ventilator order for veteran hospitals, suspended pending quality review. The notice was polite but firm. Until Atlas could demonstrate proper oversight with appropriately cleared personnel, all manufacturing would cease immediately. Troy tried calling the project manager to explain the situation. The conversation lasted exactly 2 minutes before the FDA rep cut him off. "Mr. Peterson, we don't negotiate safety requirements. Either you have proper certification or you don't. Right now, you don't." By 3 p.m., 2 more contracts had been suspended. The FDA had flagged Atlas as a safety risk in their vendor database. Other medical suppliers were quietly distancing themselves, not wanting to be associated with a company that couldn't handle basic quality protocols. Dave found Troy in his office, staring at his computer screen like it might spontaneously start working if he glared at it hard enough. "Any luck reaching Gordon?" Dave asked. Troy looked up, and for the first time since this whole mess started, he looked genuinely frightened. "He's not answering. Nobody's answering. It's like they all just disappeared." Dave didn't have the heart to tell him the truth. We hadn't disappeared. We were just done cleaning up after people who thought medical device safety was something you could order from Amazon. The rest of the week played out like a disaster movie in slow motion. Wednesday brought news that the Department of Health had launched a formal investigation into Atlas's quality management practices. Thursday, the FDA issued a public safety advisory questioning the reliability of Atlas medical devices manufactured without proper oversight. Friday afternoon, Troy showed up at my house. I was in the garage working on an old chair, something I'd been meaning to restore for months. Having free time was nice, even under the circumstances. He stood in my driveway like a door-to-door salesman who'd lost his samples, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but looking like he'd slept in it. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the desperate energy of a man watching his career circle the drain. "Gordon," he said, "we need to talk." I didn't stop working. "Nothing to talk about, Troy. You made your decision. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't realize your certification was so integral to operations." I set down my sandpaper and looked at him. I explained it multiple times. In writing. "You called it outdated paranoia." His face flushed. "Look, I made a mistake. I admit that. But we can fix this. I can get your position back. Full salary, even a raise, whatever you want. And my FDA certification? You're going to magically restore that too?" Troy's confidence flickered. "That's more complicated, but we can work out temporary measures, consulting arrangements, something to bridge the gap while we sort out the paperwork." "Troy, let me explain something to you." I stood up, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "My certification isn't a company asset. It's tied to me personally. When you fired me, you didn't just lose an employee, you lost the legal authority to manufacture medical devices. Period. But there has to be something. Some kind of appeal process, emergency authorization. There is something. You could have planned a proper transition. You could have respected 22 years of experience instead of dismissing it as bloated operations. You could have treated life support equipment manufacturing with a little more seriousness than a software upgrade." Troy's composure finally cracked completely. "This is insane. You can't just shut down an entire company because you're angry about being fired." "I didn't shut down anything," I said calmly. "I revoked my access to systems that required my personal authorization. The fact that you built your entire business model around something you didn't understand isn't my problem." He stared at me for a long moment, probably running through all the corporate negotiation tactics he'd learned in business school. None of them applied here because this wasn't a negotiation. This was consequences. "The investigation," he said quietly. "How long will it take?" "Depends on what they find. Could be weeks, could be months. They're very thorough when it comes to medical device safety violations." "Safety violations? We didn't violate anything. Troy, you handed life support manufacturing oversight to an unqualified contractor. In the FDA's eyes, that's exactly what you did." He left without another word, probably to make more phone calls to people who couldn't help him. The company folded 6 weeks later. Carl Richardson lost his house trying to cover the legal expenses and regulatory fines. Gary Sullivan ended up managing a medical supply warehouse in Phoenix. The FDA investigation found no criminal wrongdoing, just catastrophic incompetence in safety management. 180 people lost their jobs. Good people like Dave, Rebecca, and Nicole, who'd tried to warn management but been ignored. The production workers who'd spent years perfecting their craft. The engineers who actually understood what they were building. That part didn't feel good. But those 180 jobs were always at risk the moment Troy decided expertise was dispensable. I just made the consequences visible faster than market forces would have. As for Troy, he bounced around a few consulting firms before settling into a project management role at a software company in Austin. Turns out destroyed $45 million medical device manufacturer doesn't look great on a resume when potential employers dig into the details. I got a new job within 10 days. Turned out that experienced quality directors with active FDA certification and a track record of actually understanding what they're protecting are in extremely high demand. My new employer, Precision Medical Systems, spent 3 hours in the interview process just verifying that I really did have all the qualifications I claimed. Refreshing change from working for people who didn't know what questions to ask. The irony wasn't lost on me. Troy had fired me to save money and improve efficiency. Instead, he destroyed a $45 million business and put 180 people out of work. All because he couldn't tell the difference between cutting costs and cutting corners with people's lives. 6 months later, I ran into Dave at an industry conference. He'd landed at a defense contractor that actually valued institutional knowledge. We grabbed coffee and talked about the old days at Atlas. "You know what bothers me?" Dave said. "Troy still doesn't understand what he did wrong. I heard through industry contacts that he tells people you sabotage the company out of spite." I shrugged. "Let him think that. Some people need to believe their failures are someone else's fault. Doesn't it bother you, being the villain in his version of the story?" "Dave, in my version of the story, I'm the guy who spent 22 years keeping medical devices safe from people who didn't deserve access to them. Troy's version doesn't change that. The thing about quality control work is that success is invisible. Nobody notices when you prevent equipment failures, catch manufacturing defects, or keep faulty devices away from patients who need them to live. They only notice when protection fails. Troy had mistaken my careful competence for dispensable bureaucracy, expertise for inefficiency, and safety protocols for outdated paranoia. He learned the difference the hard way, just like they always do. Some lessons can only be taught by consequences, and consequences don't care about business plans or quarterly projections. They just are. Troy wanted to disrupt traditional manufacturing models without understanding what those traditions were protecting. He got his disruption, just not the kind he was hoping for. In the end, you can't outsource responsibility. And medical device safety is just applied responsibility. When you remove the people who understand the systems stop working, regardless of how much money you think you're saving. The most expensive lesson in business isn't the one that costs you money. It's the one that teaches you the difference between what looks efficient in a boardroom and what actually keeps people alive in the real world. My son Michael called me last month from his new posting in Germany. "Dad," he said, "I heard about what happened at your old company. You did the right thing. Equipment like that, it has to work when people need it most. That's the only review that matters to me. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against corporate arrogance isn't fighting back. It's simply stepping away and letting incompetence reveal itself." In the end, expertise isn't about what you know. It's about understanding the difference between what can be replaced and what should never be risked.